Hello, I'm Marion Fulker and I'm the CEO of Perth's leading think tank, the Committee for Perth. Welcome to Fact-Based Talks, an online series where you get to hear the latest research from our organisation. Fact-Based is a long-standing joint venture research program between the Committee for Perth and the University of Western Australia. We are the leaders in delivering tangible research that drives structural, cultural and behaviour change on issues that matter to the people of Greater Perth. To date, the partnership has produced more than 80 pieces of research, creating a knowledge base on issues that affect our region and its future. These include the economy, global competitiveness, transport and mobility, gender equality, and the region's demography and geography, to name but a few. Each of these is available on our website for download free of charge. This current series of fact-based talks is the opportunity to share incremental research on our Future of Work project, which aims to equip WA and its people for the changing world of work.
Thanks for the opportunity to present the findings of Fact-Based 74. This Fact-Based examines the relationship between human capital and employment in Greater Perth and WA. And the motivator for the research was previous fact-based Future of Work fact-based bulletins, which examined and established that the skills of the workforce are a central factor influencing the ability of individual workers, businesses and the economy to diversify and adapt to change. This includes change like technological advancement, industry innovation and global megatrends like population ageing and climate change. Without a skilled and knowledgeable workforce, countries, regions, businesses risk falling behind in innovation, productivity growth and adaptation. And they risk being heavily hit by periods of economic shock and recession. In WA, our research to date has suggested that it's low-skill workers who are most vulnerable to negative impacts from changes like technological advancement and recessions. This highlighted the need for us to understand the makeup of the workforce in the state and in Perth. It's also found that WA has been a significant importer of talent and that a key concern of businesses now and for the future is that they can't find the skills and talent that they need within the homegrown workforce. So if we shift to slide 2, this slide outlines the aims of this fact-based bulletin, which were to measure human capital in Greater Perth, outline evidence regarding the benefits of human capital to workers in Perth, consider the geographic dispersal of human capital within Greater Perth, and identify some of the factors that influence education attainment in the Australian context. So in regard to measuring human capital, if we shift to the next slide, the primary reason for measuring human capital is because human capital delivers significant individual and societal benefits. Skilled and knowledgeable workers are more likely to be employed, while businesses with a skilled workforce are more likely to be productive. Early fact-based research undertaken for the Committee for Perth, such as Fact-Based 14, highlighted the benefits of human capital and examined changes in human capital within the metro region from about the late 90s to the early 2000s. And at that time, human capital was identified as a key regional strength, with Greater Perth having the highest level of human capital of all the major capital cities in Australia. This was prior to the mining boom of the early 21st century. In the subsequent 2 decades, it became apparent that the boom not only influenced WA's economy and factors like population growth, but it also had a substantial impact on the skill profile of the workforce. This bulletin therefore aimed to examine how changes in human capital are linked to trends in economic growth, employment and industries employment over the past 2 decades. It's found that human capital within Greater Perth has been strongly influenced by the mining boom and demand for workers in the mining and associated sectors over that period. If we shift to the next slide, I'll provide a quick recap on the findings of previous fact-based bulletins examining human capital. Fact-Based Bulletin 14, prepared in 2010, identified significant growth in the share of people with a bachelor's degree or higher in Australia in the 10 years from 96 to 2006. Brisbane recorded the highest growth, increasing 85.7%, followed by Perth, where an increase of 74% was recorded. Fact-Based Bulletin 25, prepared in 2012, looked at the spatial dispersal of human capital between 2001 and 2006, The bulletin highlighted the relative stability of human capital dispersal within Greater Perth over that period. Yet it also found a concentration of low-ranking areas, including Inner Fremantle, Kwinana, Mandurah, Murray, Rockingham and Waroona, which are all located south of central Perth. In 2015, Fact-Based Bulletin 42 examined human capital in Greater Perth using 2011 census data. It found that the Human Capital Index score for Greater Perth fell between 2001 and 2011, although it remained positive. Notably, over this period, Perth fell from having the highest level of human capital of all Australia's major cities to third. This bulletin has furthered this work by comparing human capital in major metro regions in Australia based on 2016 census data. So the next slide just gives a quick overview of the methodology. This bulletin applied the same methodology as Fact-Bases 25 and 42, which used PCA analysis to compare human capital in Australian cities. The indicators used included qualifications, so the proportion of people who have achieved a non-university or a university higher education qualification, and the proportion of people without very low levels of education. So that is, they did have at least year 10 to 12 level education. It also included the proportion of people attending a higher education institution, the percentage of people who are proficient in English, and the proportion of people who are proficient in English and another language. So moving to the next slide, an analysis showed that the overall variability of human capital between major cities in Australia has been declining. It also showed that while human capital within Greater Perth remains positive and has not declined per se, it has declined comparative to other major capitals. In particular, over the past 20 years, we've seen increases in human capital in Greater Melbourne and Sydney, while growth in human capital in Greater Perth and Brisbane was less significant. Factors that have contributed to Greater Melbourne and Sydney's increasing human capital score include higher proportions of the populations that are bilingual, have a higher education qualification, and are enrolled in education. Perth performs lower than the mean in regard to the proportion of residents who are bilingual and who are enrolled in higher education. However, English proficiency is a strength, and the percentage of people with a higher education qualification is above the mean. So shifting to the next slide, another way of examining the difference in education attainment between Australia's major capitals is through location quotients. This table shows the types of education qualification that are dominant in each capital city. It indicates that in WA, education qualifications that are dominant compared to other states are Certificate 3 and 4, Advanced Diploma, Associate Degree and Secondary Education. It also highlights that Greater Perth is no longer a city with a comparative advantage in regard to the proportion of workers with a bachelor degree. So if we move on to slide 8, when I examined trends in human capital in Greater Perth and elsewhere, the picture that emerged was that the comparative decline in human capital in Greater Perth compared to other major cities is associated with the early 21st century mining boom. Australian and international evidence shows that when economies are strong, particularly due to resource sector growth, the process of human capital accumulation is inhibited by the increasing opportunity cost of studying. This is because individuals are more likely to choose to enter the labour market and make use of the higher wages induced by the boom rather than enrol in study. This trend is particularly apparent among young people because mining and resource booms can be associated with relatively high wages for unskilled and low-skilled workers. For example, previous fact-based bulletins have found that during the early 21st century, and particularly between 2005 and 2015, workers in Greater Perth and WA with non-university and other qualifications were often engaged in higher income activities than those with university level qualifications. The result was a decline in higher education enrolment, which is apparent in the enrolment stats for WA and Queensland, both mining states, compared to non-mining states like New South Wales and Victoria. For example, prior to the mining boom, the proportion of 15 to 29-year-olds enrolled in full-time study was 4% higher in non-mining states than mining states. Yet during the mining boom, the rate of higher education enrolment in mining states fell to 10% below that of non-mining states. And this disparity was greatest among young people and full-time enrolments and peaked between 2012 and 2013. On this graph, you can see that WA and Queensland are at the bottom of the graph, with enrolments of 20 to 29-year-olds in higher education declining in 2005 and sitting below the other states until the end of the boom in about 2015. A similar pattern is evident in enrolments of 15 to 19-year-olds. Yet, despite this decline, the proportion of the working age population with a certificate 3 or 4 or higher education qualification did increase over this period, and the skill profile of the Greater Perth workforce shifted away from tertiary educated workers towards trades and technicians. And an explanation for this is that WA imported skilled workers into the state through interstate and overseas migration, and in particular, overseas migration played an important role in WA compared to other states like Queensland that mainly imported workers from interstate. So if we move on to the next slide, given that the evidence that the education profile in WA and Greater Perth has shifted to adapt to the needs of industry over time, and that during the boom, the opportunity costs of studying were high, it's important to understand whether this has changed after the resource boom. An analysis of ABS data in 2006 established correlations between rates of human capital and higher medium age and home ownership in Greater Perth at that time. However, it did not find a relationship between human capital and income, and this was thought to reflect the availability of low-skilled yet relatively well-paid jobs. However, this analysis has confirmed that by 2015, a positive relationship did exist between human capital and labour force participation, employment and income in Greater Perth, increasing incentives for people to enrol in higher education. If we shift to the next slide, which is a map of human capital dispersal in Greater Perth, it became clear that while industry and job growth provides a relatively clear explanation for differences in human capital between the major cities, it's less able to account for differences between statistical areas and LGAs within Perth. Previous fact-based research found that concentrations of low human capital are in areas south of Perth, like Kwinana, Mandurah, Murray, Rockingham and Waroona. For this bulletin, human capital scores were calculated at statistical area level 2 and LGA authority or local government authority level for 2011 and 2016. The scores confirm that human capital in the region remained relatively stable over that period, yet it also showed that there are areas of sustained human capital advantage and disadvantage. At the local authority level, LGAs with high human capital scores were found clustered in central Perth and inner and middle suburbs, particularly those that are home to tertiary education precincts. LGAs with low human capital scores were found to be concentrated in the southwest and southeast of the region, but were also identified in the northeast. Some local authority areas with a low human capital base have had a consistently low base since 2001. This includes Mandurah, Rockingham, Kwinana, Armidale, Serpentine, Jarrahdale and Murray. Yet, with the exception of the Shire of Murray, all of these local authority areas recorded small positive gains in human capital between 2011 and 2016. If we move on to the next slide, these differences are also illustrated in this table, which shows that statistical local areas with human capital that is significantly above mean are concentrated in the central sub-region, including Perth City Centre and areas that host tertiary education institutions. Statistical areas with very low education attainment are primarily in the outer suburbs. If we shift to the next slide, literature indicates that the reasons for these geographic disparities in education attainment are multiple and complex, but an important factor includes the choices that young people make on whether to work, enrol in university or undertake vocational study. And these are linked to characteristics of the individual, their family, their school and residential area. For example, recent literature shows that young people are less likely to enrol in higher education if their parents don't have a higher education qualification themselves. They're also less likely to study if they don't have easy access to an education institution, or if there are jobs available to them that don't require a higher education qualification. This makes some outer suburban locations potentially vulnerable to long-term disadvantage. The next slide shifts topics slightly to examine another aim of this bulletin, which was to understand human capital in the emerging workforce in order to get a feel for how well future workers will be placed to meet industry needs. This included an examination of study choices in Australian states today. And it found that in 2011, there was a strong concentration of students enrolled in natural and physical sciences and engineering and related tech in WA. Yet the deceleration of employment growth in the mining sector and construction sector post-boom, accompanied by growth in employment in the health industry and the education sector, has impacted on these choices. As a result, by 2019, natural and physical sciences remained a field of education specialisation in WA, yet was less significant than concentrations of students studying health and education. In addition, the proportion of students enrolled in engineering and related tech fell below the national average. By contrast, the comparative proportion of engineering students in New South Wales and Victoria increased. This shift away from education in mining-related disciplines is consistent with a global fall in students choosing mining-related courses over the past 5 years. In Australia, the Minerals Tertiary Education Council identified a drastic decline of 73% in first-year education enrolments in mining engineering between 2015 and 2018. And the number of graduates across Australia is predicted to fall from a high of 262 in 2014 to just 53 this year. Reasons cited for this decline include the cyclical nature of the mining industry, and prospective work has been put off by perceptions of a boom-bust cycle. They also include increased competition from sectors like health science and technology, which have a strong appeal to science, technology, engineering and maths graduates. Moving to the next slide, this shift is important because mining remains the key industry of specialisation in WA. It's a propulsive industry that generates jobs in other sectors and is more important to WA than any other industry is to any other state in Australia. So just to recap, the next slide provides a bit of an overview of the key findings, and these are that there has been a decline in human capital in Greater Perth compared to Greater Sydney and Melbourne. WA has experienced a shift towards non-university qualifications from 2011 to 2016, particularly Certificate 3 and 4 level qualifications. There are lower proportions of young people aged 15 to 29 in WA choosing to enrol in higher education than in other states, particularly non-mining states like New South Wales and Victoria. There are disparities in levels of human capital in Greater Perth, and areas of long-term human capital disadvantage are in fringe suburban areas, particularly to the south of the Perth city centre. And there's been a swing away from enrolment in mining-associated disciplines towards enrolment in service sector disciplines like health and education. So moving to the final slide, this research forms part of the picture of the Future of Work project, and in terms of understanding WA's needs as it adapts to future of work conditions. We're still undertaking other research, and this includes Fact-Based Bulletin 75, which examines the impacts of COVID-19 on WA and Greater Perth compared to Australia and the rest of the world. This will be followed by the preparation of the final Future of Work project report, and this process will involve socialisation sessions with members to examine and discuss the draft recommendation. The final report will be released in September this year. So thanks very much for your time.
I trust you find the information and analysis contained in this presentation stimulating and that it adds to your understanding of a complex issue that affects us all. Thank you for listening to Fact-Based Talks. Our research is available on our website to download free of charge, and you will find this bulletin and other bulletins related to the future of work and all other areas that the Committee for Perth covers on Perth and its future available there.